and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. With Southeast Asia experiencing one of the fastest urbanization rates in the world, the region's cities are competing for status on the global stage. Now, sustainable development consultancy Arrup recently released their latest city competitiveness report, which offers some new insights into ranking Asian cities on their livability and their investor appeal. So joining me on the show to discuss this report in further detail is Murali Ram, who is the Malaysian lead for Arrup's Cities and Advisory Practice. He's also the lead author of the book Creating Future-Proof Cities, How to Navigate the Climate Crisis. Welcome to the show. It's good to have you here, Murali.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the latest report. So Arrup's latest city competitiveness report ranks KL overall in the aspiring category. Okay, I want to talk about that. So it's overall in the aspiring category, and KL is also a contender in 3 out of 4 categories. I'm curious to understand these different categories and how Arrup views KL's urban competitiveness.
Okay, so maybe I'll set a bit of a context first. So we did a similar study about 2 years ago, so urban competitiveness. And then we realized actually what a city would be looked at as competitive in the future may not be something that we look at it today. So it's about future-facing competitiveness. And when we talk to clients about what they're looking for in cities that they want to invest in, they're asking different sorts of questions, right? And they're looking at different things: talent pipeline, climate readiness, climate ambition, and things like that, because it also aligns with their ESG strategy. So they got an ESG strategy, they want to move into a city, and then they look at, oh, does this city have A, B, and C, right? Water, renewable energy, things like that. So it was quite interesting. Then when we look at traditional matrices, we realize a lot of it doesn't cover what investors are looking for.
Okay.
And indeed, somehow talent also. Talent also is looking for cities with, bold ambitions. So that's how we started thinking about what will a new matrix look like. So we came up with a set of 40 indicators. And so what we did was we then started looking at cities to sort of rank, or rather, to just sort of find out how everyone's doing. So we chose 63 cities.
Okay.
So it's not all the cities in the world, just to be clear. It's 63 cities. And we chose them because either Arrup has a presence in those cities, so it's familiar to us. Also, these cities could be in the C40 cities network or the resilient cities network. And so that's how we chose the cities. Then also, there must be enough data to use in order to put into the methodology. So that's one. And then we didn't actually rank them from 1 to 63, but we ranked them based in like best in class, contender, aspiring, things like that. So this is where Kuala Lumpur falls into a sort of a bucket, if you may.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So aspiring. So before we get into KL's specific challenges and opportunities, why is it important that we measure a city's competitiveness, so to speak? I mean, who is it that is using these rankings, these matrices, and why is it that traditional, I guess, economic measures like GDP, why is that not reflective enough of how well a city is doing or how much appeal a city has?
So I'll start with an anecdote. I just was reading 2 weeks ago in the US, I think it's a proportion of about 20% of companies are looking at relocating.
Oh.
Right? Yeah. So when they're looking at an expansion, they're already thinking about where do we relocate to. A, they may relocate to within the same state. B, they relocate to other states. The reasons for relocation, well, there they have tax differentials. So there's taxes, talent pipeline, and climate. So companies are also doing, in their reporting, for instance, they do something called TCFD, Task Force for Climate and Financial Disclosure. And that's also subsumed into the IFRS reporting now. And you have to start considering what are your climate risks. Is where I am a risk? Is the logistics of getting stuff into my plant a risk? And then you start what is your mitigation measure? Do you stay or you go? Can you prevent this from happening? Do you really need to be here? So that's where it gets, you know. So that's the anecdote.
Okay.
So for cities like Kuala Lumpur, when we are continually striving to attract new businesses, there's also a need to retain existing businesses, right? Especially global ones, because they are like a magnet and everything kind of like, you know, grows around them. So we need to be prepared to, you know, be in the right boxes that they tick.
Right.
When they consider a choice of whether we relocate here or do we stay here, things like that. Yeah. So that's why it's important.
Okay, so KL was, if we were to drill down into how we performed in this, so KL was categorized as aspiring in the livability and lovability. I thought that was really a nice category. So we're doing well in that respect, but there are areas where we can improve. So talk to me about where KL specifically can become more competitive in those measures, in those areas.
Okay, so I think we scored well for things like urban governance.
Okay.
So you have, that's basically like waste management, looking at green spaces, things like that. So we perform well there. And amenities, vibrancy, which adds to the livability, lovability. Livability also takes into account air quality. Okay,
what's livability?
Lovability.
Yeah.
So the lovability is a stickiness factor. You want to come back.
Oh.
You know, it's a place that you want to come back. So to just give you I'm from Penang.
Yeah.
So Penang has got a very high, it's not in this equation, but Penang has got a very high lovability quotient. And that's why companies want to come and invest there, because it's not only about bringing your company there, having the infrastructure, the talent pipeline. Where do you take your people to go and makan-makan when, you know, your boss comes? Where do you take them, right? And then the boss would say, hey, you know, I had a good time. I want to come back there.
It's a bit of character
in
the
character.
city. Okay.
So what is the stickiness factor that gets people to stick around or come back and visit again? So that's the stickiness factors and lovability. So actually Singapore is, well, we focus on lovability a lot because they try to inject that character into the space.
Yes.
So in fact, our office in Singapore, I think is helping with some lovability strategy for Singapore. I mean, but yeah, interesting word, concept, but it's all about character of the space and how that reacts, how that inspires people to you know.
So what are the areas that we can improve on? I mean, I'm looking at the other categories, and assets and infrastructure is an area that we can improve on. Investor attractiveness is another area. What are the barriers for KL to do better in those categories?
Well, okay, so this is not me, this is the research, right?
Okay.
The research, and the research points out mobility as a key, you know, area that can be improved. So I infer that as last mile connectivity, because you know, of all the cities in Malaysia, KL has got the best public transportation. That's, you know, it's just the best. I don't drive, you know, you just take the train everywhere. The last mile connectivity is the kind of like the stumbling block, because sometimes, you know, you can get there, you can get to Pusat Bandar Damansara station, but you cannot get to Pusat Bandar Damansara.
Yes,
you
know, you can't walk over there. Yes.
You got all these like 5 layers of traffic. How do you get there? So the city is designed with it's a car-centric city. It's designed for cars, right? And you know, there are 2-3 layers, but you don't have enough infrastructure for people to walk, to cycle, and micro-mobility. So you remember about, I think 3 years ago, there was this, a lot of beam scooters.
Yes, that's right.
People were using e-scooters.
Yeah.
It was gaining in popularity. You come and put your credit card, and then you can just ride, keep it in the LRT station, and then come back, you know, all that kind of thing. It just saves a lot of time, right, and effort. But then, I think it was the Ministry of Transport that said, hey, no, cannot. Because dangerous, da. But because the priority is the cars.
Right.
You know, the priority seems, I mean, of course, dangerous for people.
Yes. Because of the cars.
Because of the cars, number one. But also, our pavements are not, you know,
pedestrian friendly.
Pedestrian friendly to begin with. Why don't you fix that? instead of taking this off the road, you know.
Understood.
So that, and then, yeah, so that's the thing. So anyway, coming back to your question. So I think the key one was mobility. There was another factor which was inclusivity, but to be fair, only 20% of the cities did high on inclusivity.
What would that
But
entail?
I think that's talking about inclusivity from disability, making sure that people can access amenities in an equal manner, that sort of stuff. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But the key thing is the mobility aspect. I think we can really you can imagine at Kuala Lumpur, we are now quite polycentric in a way, meaning you don't have to all go into the CBD. Now got many CBDs. You've got your TRX, you've got your Bandar Malaysia coming up, you've got Bangsa South, and so there's many of these pockets, and there's also housing around these pockets, and they're very much connected by public transportation. So it's rethinking how you can create these 15-minute precincts, right, or 10-minute precincts where everything is within a walking distance or a beam ride away,
right? And
then you don't have to travel jauh-jauh, it's all within, so we can start rethinking how we use the spaces.
Can I ask you whether urban design or urban planning for Asian cities is different from when you look at, say, city competitiveness of other more established cities, the Londons and the Sydneys of the world, the New Yorks of the world. When we think about the way countries in ASEAN has urbanized, it's a lot more organic and less planned. How do we think about city how do you compare between ASEAN cities versus more established cities with a different history and finance structure and all that? Is it a fair comparison to make?
Yeah, you make a good point in that in different ways the cities have been planned, but it's more complex than I can explain. Sorry. The reason because is the early cities or planned cities would be like the European cities, and you see they're very close. They're very very tight, and you can walk, and so the density is kind of managed, and it's very accessible, pedestrian accessibility and all that. But they also had this period with the introduction of the cars. That's where everything changed, right? And so Asian cities have been around far longer as well. So it's kind of the same. We moved around on foot, we moved around on horses. So okay, fine. But when and rail, right? But when the car became ubiquitous, that's where everything changed.
Yeah.
So, and if you look at America, the sprawl started to happen.
Yeah.
People started to drive 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers into the city, and all that. And we kind of learn from that, right? So we suddenly have some other far away place that you develop, and then you drive, nice, tree-lined streets, you drive, polluting the environment, it's okay, So if I take an example from Amsterdam. So Amsterdam had a serious problem. Of course, it's not the same as you see it now. Now people are cycling and all that. But at one time, it was choked with cars. And then there was a conscious decision to say, we got to do things differently. They even introduced, I think it was the 1950s, small, like half a Kanchil size electric cars.
Yes, those tiny cars.
Tiny white cars, and then you drive them, and then you park them, and then they charge. So you pay, and then it's publicly used. Small little cars that you park. It was really interesting. It's an experiment, even then. So they had all these sort of problems, which they solved by prioritizing movement within the city. So pedestrians first. So it is the hierarchy, right? Pedestrians first, cyclists, buses, and then the cars come last. So if you're driving, I'm sorry, I'm not going to make parking easy for you. You find your way, So that's where the change happened. So the cities that you see now that we say are high may have been in the same boat that we are in now 40 years ago. But they made a change because it's already so it's just a question of our level of affluence wasn't there yet 40 years ago, but we have caught up now. And we're having the same problems they're having because everybody needs to own a car.
Well,
and that's
wouldn't that be great, because now we have a template, right? We know what works. And it's a matter of the political collective will to get it done. So talk to me about that. When when you know what it takes to make a city resilient, when you know what it takes to make a city livable, but you have all these other competing factors of let's make it attractive to investors, let's make it you know, cheaper for people to come into the city. Are those conflicting interests? I'm wondering whether there are there times where increasing the competitiveness of a city, its investor appeal, could that be sometimes at odds with the need to make a city more resilient? Sometimes investor interest can be short-term, and urban resilience requires long-term thinking and investment.
Okay, fair enough. So it's really a question of who are we doing it for? Right? Who are we doing it for?
That's a good one.
So, if improving systems within the city, like improving pedestrianization, mobility, access, if these things add from a ranking perspective to livability and lovability, right? But the beneficiaries are us. The residents. The residents, right? And similarly, if you are you know, attempting to have a climate action plan or an urban heat island plan or flood resilience plan, and you know, you war-warkan all these things and you say, oh, you know, we're going to like, you know, go big on these, and we're going to, and you know, investors appreciate that you're taking action, and they feel safe that at least for the next foreseeable 15 years, you know, you're going to be a good place to be in. But who are the beneficiaries? It's again us. So that, you know, our houses don't get flooded, and you know, and you know, our lives don't get disrupted and things like that. So on one hand, it's it looks like you're chasing something, but I think the underlying messaging should be that this is for our betterment as a whole.
Well, I think about, you know, if you just look at land use plans, right? The need, the desire to build more office space, build more parking lots. That's attractive to investors because they think, oh, look, I've got lots of infrastructure here. But on the flip side, that's more density, that's you know, less livability, so to speak. So those are the kind of competing narratives I think about.
It's interesting that you say that. Just last week, I got all kinds of clients. So just last week, I had a client from Australia who are looking to relocate their entire operations to Kuala Lumpur, right? I mean, there'll be cost considerations as well, but their market, So they want to set up. So their question to me was, we've got a net zero target. Which building should we get into in KL? So then you draw up the parameters. So access to public transportation becomes really important, performance of the building, But it's still not net zero because they want net zero. Net zero means like reduce as much as humanly possible, offset the rest, right? They said, but we want something we can control. And the only way they can control it is by looking at retrofits. So if they, let's say, pick up an old building, right, that's not performing well, and they invest money in converting that building, say an old mall, old hotel, you know, what do you call that? Theater, cinema, whatever, and you convert that into a high-performing building, and you reuse the carbon that's already locked in. Now that is proper net zero, you know, thinking. And they're going for it. So they're like, okay, let's go and find a building that is the parameters are access to public transportation, and then we will find the funding, because they also get carbon credits out of it. You can actually get carbon credits by, you know.
Is that typical? Is that something that, you know, what people are increasingly looking for?
Yes, it is not typical, but it is something that will become more and more common in the next 10 years, I think.
That's encouraging.
Yeah, it is. But it's coming from, you know, the push is coming from everywhere because of our climate situation at the moment. Yeah, companies are adopting these principles, and I think it's going to be private sector led, a lot of it.
That's quite interesting, because I did have a thought about what the role of the private sector is, because really it cannot just fall on governments to think about the urban resilience of cities. And you're saying private sector is very keen to push ahead with progress. Who's leading? Who's leading? Where should the driver come from?
Okay, so this is anywhere. private sector has always been kind of ahead in a way, leading. It's everywhere, not only in Malaysia, right? So because there's a certain demand that businesses make and things like that. And governments are a bit more clunkier, right? So it's understandable. So even in Malaysia, you can see now we've got things like the energy transformation roadmap, which would mean our grid becoming decarbonized, and these are really positive signs. And it makes Malaysia as a whole more attractive to investors because they have their own net zero targets, and they need to be somewhere with net zero. So Sarawak, for instance, has got about 65% of their energy comes from hydro. So, and then they will be thinking in terms of how do we make best use of our renewable energy, right? And companies would want to go there because they're looking for that kind of, especially high emissions industries. So there is a certain location choice based on the industry that you're in. Now, coming back to is the private sector willing to invest? So it also depends on how serious they are about their targets. So if they've got a net zero target and they're serious in achieving it, then they need to find a way in order to achieve it. And the thinking is, among your peers, you want to be the leader. So among the banks, one bank would want to be, okay, I want to expand my sustainable finance network, say. So what does that mean? So you need to define what is sustainable finance. Are you financing, say, poor entrepreneurs? Are you financing decarbonization? You're financing infrastructure that leads to decarbonization. The
transition
the transition and all that. So then you categorize that under the taxonomy, and then you sort of like, then go out to the market and find opportunities, right? So there is some of that happening. So coming back to how can the private sector participate? So let's say, but this is also where government comes in.
Yeah.
So let's say a typical housing developer, right? So they are building, let's say a 40-story building, right? And so the government imposes certain conditions on them. Say you need to pay X amount development charges. You need to build some tapak penjaja. You need to have the hawker centers, right? You need to have 8 stories of car parks, 3 per unit, and things like that. These are impositions, planning impositions that you put on the private developer. If they won't build anything, right? They'll just build the house and sell. But because they have to comply, they do all these things. Now, can we rethink how we ask them to spend that money? Can you provide me a link to the LRT station with a buggy that takes people every 10 minutes?
Right.
Instead of building many car parks,
right?
And then you start thinking about, so what kind of infrastructure can you provide a park for the benefit of, and then with also some sort of green spaces, but also can double up as a flood mitigation, because you can have a permeable surface with a sort of a tank that sort of holds back the water rather than letting it go into the street.
So innovative thinking around how to work together with the private sector. Is that what you're seeing?
Yes. So that's sorry.
Is that what you're seeing in KL? Is that the future of how?
I think it has to be the future because you can't rely on government to fund everything, right? So and they have to find ways to fund it. And they're always looking for where's the funding coming from? Where's the funding? Coming from,
Where is the money?
Where is the money? Where is the money?
How do we have the money?
So sometimes it's the money. The money, what do you call that? Bucket is there, but maybe it's being used for different purposes. So how can we, instead of building a new highway, can we build a bus lane? Can we give up 1 lane out of your 6-lane road for a bus, so that people can move faster on the bus than in the car? So it's this kind of like, it's not even strange suggestion, but but some people will say, how can we cannot give up? It's not your father's road. It is government property, which is meant to be for public use. And how are we defining or delineating that public use? And who are we prioritizing? We're prioritizing people who can afford cars, richer people, as opposed to people who can't, or people who want to do something for the environment and have a car but don't want to drive it, or can afford a car and don't want to drive it, but you're making it difficult for these people. So anyway, so coming back to your question, it's about the funding is there, private sector can play a part, but I think they need some sort of steer.
Yeah.
So they need some sort of guidance as to what kind of help you can give the city as a whole, and then you break it down into precincts and see how we can improve different precincts, and then sort of help get to your targets.
This is where the government comes in to provide that kind of lens, because they have the bird's eye view lens. Thank you so much, Murali, for being on the show. It's been so enlightening to look at our cities differently. So I appreciate your time. Thank you. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.